Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Mhm. Great. And then also, I want to turn on the transcript. No, I wanted to turn on the closed captions. Stop recording transcript. Yeah, it'll add, YouTube will add closed captions. Okay, welcome everybody to our Sunday evening Zoom meeting, and thanks for doing it so impromptu. I know we hadn't actually planned to do this, but given everything that's happened over the last week, I thought this would be very useful as uh, for me personally, this is really impacting how it is that I view um, Andrew Rillera's work on Lamb of the Free. So I thought it might be nice, seeing as how I'm going to be doing the study on Lamb of the Free, I thought it might be nice to bring you guys along with me um, on the journey that I've been on for probably the better part of a month. Maybe even a little longer, but really in the last 2, 3 weeks. So, and that has led to this thing that I'm calling the divine name pattern. And that has been, as it says, it has been a journey. So it really all started with the Cloud Rider study. And at that time, I had a number of different beliefs, but these are three that came to me off the top of my head that really applied. One is that from my point of view at the time, whenever I saw Elohim, I was really mostly talking about God all by himself, Father, Son, Spirit, Yahweh, whatever the case might be. That was kind of my view, especially when it came to Genesis chapter 1, and not so much the remainder. And the thing that I will say about that is the divine council, and this is something, this is going to be going to the divine council, Deuteronomy 32 world group or world view group that Mike started. And so really I want to bring that aboard from my point of view, and you guys help me out if you know of more, but in Mike Heiser's book, Unseen Realm and Reversing Herman, he really, we know the story, many of us, about how it is that he had his aha moment sitting in church looking at Psalm 82. So there's the Psalm 82 that he kind of hung his hat on quite a bit with the divine council. There's also the Deuteronomy 32. And then the third one might be the, what is it, Second Kings 21 or 22, where it's Ahab and Jehoshaphat and Micaiah, and Micaiah is telling about the vision that he has of uh, God with all of the spirits, and the one spirit that says, "Hey, I know what we'll do. I'll be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets." Blah blah blah. So those three, Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, and wherever exactly it is in Kings, it's escaping me. But those three, from my point of view at the time and even now, those were kind of the three that Mike Heiser built this whole um, uh, divine council. And there may have been others. I'm just missing them. So, folks, just forgive me if I am not picking up on the rest. But those are the really the three that I'm aware of. So I really felt like, okay, divine council worldview, Deuteronomy 32, got it. This is great. And then trying to just allow that to live across scripture and Genesis 6 and the The sons of God descending, Mount Hermon, the whole first Enoch thing, Jubilees thing, so on and so forth. Even some of the testaments of the patriarchs. I think Levi talks about it. Reuben talks about it. Benjamin may talk about it. There's a few others that mention the Watchers. Oh, and of course, uh, maybe a fourth one is Daniel, where there's the decree by the Watchers, that whole thing. So, but it was really kind of just in just a few places that I'm sorry, that the divine council really came aboard. So for my mind, Elohim was just God. Then there's, as you might recall from our Cloud Rider study, that I went back to Genesis 1, and really I thought that the spirit that was hovering in Genesis 1, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, was the cloud throne, with God riding the cloud throne, and he shows up and does what it is that he does in Genesis. And in my mind, I was still of a mind that this was material creation. At the time of the Cloud Rider study, that's where it is that my mind and my concept and conclusions stayed. And then, of course, that led into, as you know, that there was the Cloud Riders, the Supreme Cloud Rider, which is Yahweh, ultimately is Jesus, and that the his lesser Elohim spirit beings are also cloud riders, and that then you've got the bad guys that are doing the same thing. They're riding clouds, and this is ultimately modern UFO and UAPs. So kind of a recap of Cloud Rider study, but that's where my mind was at that time, however many months that's been now. I don't know what, 4 or 5. Anyway, um, but this was partly based upon a number of people. One is Mauro Biglino, and we had a great time kind of carving good old Mauro up a little bit. But one of the things that he has that's very steady and is a was in his wheelhouse, minus all the wackadoo UFO stuff that Biglino's into. The one thing that is in his wheelhouse is the etymology of Semitic languages. That's his specialty. That's what he was trained in, and he really, really excelled at that. Now, um, as we're talking about the Catholic Church and the Pope blessing a block of ice, and for his next big martini, um, Mauro Biglino is a Catholic. He lives in Italy. He's Italian. He is works for one of the Catholic, I don't know, it's like a book publisher or something. And anyway, it's his job to take all these ancient Semitic words and discover their etymology, where they came from, blah, blah, blah. And because of that, I really locked onto the fact that in his eyes, the Ruach is not always and is sometimes greatly misinterpreted as the third person of the Trinity, that it is actually some kind of a physical vehicle, a literal wind, or some kind of a device, whatever the case might be, but it's very literal rather than spiritual, mystical, ethereal, whatever you want to call it. So he argues in many cases for a strict literal translation of the Hebrew Bible, which is partly where it is that he goes off the rails, because he is an absolute literalist. But that's the piece that I picked up from him, was that the Ruach is not simply third person of the Trinity, but is actually a physical thing. That's what led me into Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2, and the spirit that is there that seemed very oddly out of place, because I couldn't figure out why is the third person of the Trinity there for a cameo visit and then suddenly disappears off the face of the earth, and Jesus takes over and starts materially creating things. That really baffled me until I you know put it together to think, well, that maybe that's the throne vehicle. So, but we've talked about that in the Cloud Rider study. We don't have to go through that again. So the next thing along the line that I plugged into this equation was Dr. Mike, and I came across a video of him talking about, and the video link is here for YouTube. He was talking about how it is permissible within the Hebrew language, and especially the grammar, the way it's structured in Genesis 1:26 and 27. It is quite permissible for that to be humanity, a group of human beings, male and female, rather than the creation of Adam and Eve. Because many people will say that Genesis 1, with regard to Adam, is kind of the zoomed out view, and then Genesis 2 is the same story repeated again and zoomed in. And that's what many of us are taught. And Mike looked at that and he said, well, okay, I get it, but the Hebrew language and grammar will allow that this is talking about collective humanity being created, multiple human beings, perhaps many, perhaps millions, perhaps billions, who knows, but some group of humanity, both male and female, being created, and he creates them to be imagers. So that idea came from Mike, which seemed fairly trustworthy given his expertise in Semitic languages as well. Then came along Matthew Bates and Gospel Allegiance. We've been through that study. Thank you, Nick, very much for taking us through that. That was awesome. And we learned about Gospel Allegiance and the whole king and kingdom, so on and so forth. We don't need to cover all of that again because we've just come through that wonderful study that Nick did. So, but that was the next thing on my list. Then comes along Rillera and Lamb of the Free. Now, Rillera in Lamb of the Free has a few things that he's doing. Um, First is he's changing the view of sacrifice, specifically Leviticus chapter 16. And he really rails hard against penal substitution and says, no, sorry, not right, completely wrong. It's a late uh, theology birthed with what's his name, prior to oh gosh, uh, that's prior to Luther. Luther actually picks it up from this guy. His name starts with an A. Oh, geez. Anyway, so Luther picks it up, Calvin picks it up, then it kind of blossoms and grows and ends up with who is it? Tyndale, who coins the word atonement out of the Hebrew kafar, because he doesn't want to just transliterate kafar into English and let people figure it out. He wants to come up with something. So he jams at one and then puts an ment on the end of it, turns it into at one ment atonement, and the um, uh, the stuff is stuck to the wall ever since. And when we talk about atonement models, we're using a word that is completely concocted and invented by Tyndale because he didn't like any other word. He needed something made up that he could hang a definition on. But that's what he did. And so Rillera essentially takes penal substitution out to the woodshed, gives it a good paddling, and leaves it in the woodshed for dead. and drives on with his own version of Leviticus 16 and many, many other scriptures. We'll get to that next week, the beginnings of it. It's going to be awesome. We're going to enjoy that, I really think. But that is the other piece that was in my puzzle. Next came our friend Carrie Griffel, and Carrie had done some interviews with John Walton. She had talked about Walton's book. She went through it in great detail. And at first, when I heard it, I was almost like, really, what is this stuff? Man, this is just really weird. Is this guy for real? And I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it until I started doing, I thought, maybe there's something to this. And so let me look a little bit further into Walton. And turns out that Walton, man, he belted this out of the park. I mean, this is a fantastic view, completely obliterates material creation inside of Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, just dismantles it utterly. And he talks about Genesis 1 and 2 being a functional. Now, we're going to call it a creation account. I'm going to switch the language there a little bit. I don't like the word creation because when modern people hear the word creation, especially in connection with Genesis 1 and 2, they're thinking ex nihilo, out of nothing, out of thin air creation. Um, that's not what's going on. And it's more like, hey, I've got some really messed up, corrupted, defiled stuff that I'm dealing with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rehabilitate it and I'm going to coax the pure stuff out of it. Even though this stuff I'm starting with is messed up, I'm going to coax out the pure stuff. And long story made short of it, and this is just my own take on it at this point. We all obviously believe whatever it is that we want, but where it is that I'm sitting with it now, what I see is I see a primordial, deep, ancient ex nihilo creation, material creation that happens, who knows, tens of thousands, hundreds, millions, billions of years, who knows? I don't really know, and at one level I don't really care. But there is an ex nihilo creation. Potentially something makes all of this in terms of, or it comes from somewhere. Ultimately, that somewhere is Yahweh, that somewhere is Jesus. I still hang on to that because I don't have any reason to doubt that at the moment. But starts out with ex nihilo creation. The rebels show up. The rebels cause havoc by mixture. That's, as it turns out across scripture, as I'm viewing it, this is their modus operandi. It's what they're always doing. They're taking God's good order and they're mixing things together out of hate and spite and out of morbid curiosity, and we can do it and we can be creators and blah, blah, whatever the case is going on in their heads. They take the goodness and the order of God's creation and they mess it up and they start mixing things and hybridizing things. And this is where God shows up with his entourage in Genesis chapter 1 and says, okay, boys, we're here to clean up the mess. Get out of the way. We're going to do this. So humanity is already there. They've already been created. They've been totally messed up. There are various species of human beings that are running amok across the planet, and God coaxes out of them a realignment and a rehabilitated humanity that goes back to where it is that he wanted them to go. And this is the humanity being rehabilitated in Genesis 1, verses 26 and 27. The idea there is that uh, um, God is restoring. And in the restoration, it's like an animal husbandry thing. It happens all the time. You can take a flock of sheep or whatever animals that are uh, not perfectly sheep. They've got flaws. They've got whatever they've got, and you can through animal husbandry techniques you can cause them. Hey, Angela. Hello.
Hey,
Woohoo. So, um.
I didn't I thought you said it was next time, so
Oh no. It
oh, you're
is.
recording already. Sorry. Go ahead, go
No,
ahead.
you're fine. You're fine. No worries. Glad to have you aboard. I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
that you've missed the last 20 minutes.
It's okay.
I've been
I'll watch
setting the
it
stage.
later.
Okay. So anyway, the whole animal husbandry thing is that you can take an impure flock and you can through various techniques and breeding and different animals and so on and so forth, you can end up getting the pure line back. And this is kind of what God does with humanity in Genesis 1:26 and 27. The idea there, and this is Walton talking, is that bara and I think it's a bara and a sa, and there's one other word. These can be ex nihilo creation, but more often than not, they are organization, correct, um, working with something to bring something that is good from something that is bad, so on and so forth. They're not always about, and they may even mostly not be about creation from nothing. They're about organization and reorganization and so on and so forth. And he talks about it in terms of functional organization. This says functional creation account, but um, really he's talking about functional organization. And then talks about creating functional space and then filling that space with the creatures that need to operate within that space. It is a governmental thing. So there's a government that's going on. And then finally, when you get to day 7 and it talks about God resting, it's not that God is somehow an old man who is pooped out at the end of this long creation thing, who just needs to take a break. It is the ancient Near Eastern idea that when a king rests, it's the beginning, it's the inauguration of the time to start ruling the kingdom. You can think of it like an American president getting elected on November the 4th, and from November the 4th to January 20th of the following year, the thing that the newly elected president is doing is he's organizing his administration. He's putting together cabinet members. He's getting people in front of the Senate to be confirmed for cabinet positions and so on and so forth, so that when he gets to January the 20th and he takes the oath of office, uh, he's ready to start um, being the chief executive officer for the next 4 years. This is pretty close to the picture of the seventh phase. I don't even want to call it a day. They're not literal solar days, they're phases. You can think of them as phases of construction, tasks that have to be done in a particular order. So the first piece of it is sequester sacred space. This is the light of Genesis 1, 3 through 5. Light comes into the screaming into the darkness and says, okay, this is the space for the light. That's the space for the dark. You bad guys go over there. You messed everything up. Now the good guys are over here and we're going to start fixing things. But the first thing we have to do is we have to organize this government. And then once we get the government organized, by the way, that's the dome, that's the firmament. It's not really, there's no real sky dome that's going on. This is a dome. This is why Capitol buildings in the US have domes. Domes in governmental ruling buildings go all the way back thousands and thousands of years, that domes are physical domes on buildings are built that way because it's the seat of government. It's an echo of Genesis, where there is a dome, and that dome is the ruling organization, the structure of the government, and there's a government above, there's a government below, and waters above, waters below. Waters are not literal H2O. Again, this is a whole A&E thing that is going on. You can't view those things as materials. You have to see it through A&E eyes. So that's kind of the view of that. And the outcome of that is it really helps to reconcile Genesis with modern science, so that suddenly we can see Genesis for what it is, that it's a theology book, it's a government organization book for the incoming administration of Yahweh and all of his ruling holy ones, and so on and so forth. It is not a science text or a physics book or an astronomy book. So that's what Carrie brought to the table with her foray into John Walton's stuff, and that hit me like a ton of bricks, as you can tell. So this is kind of the my journey with this thing. Started out way back about 3 years ago, almost now. That ran into a guy, Trey Smith. Smith led to Heiser. Heiser led to Bates. Bates to Rillera. Rillera to Walton via Carey. That put me on the scent of a whole idea around sacred space that you guys heard me talk about quite a bit as we were going through Nick's study and presentation, leading us into gospel allegiance. And then I started thinking about Genesis 1 and a prehistory prior to Genesis 1 sometime about a month and a half ago or so. Heiser opened me up with the whole Genesis 1:26. Hey, this can be humanity, not Adam. And then I started thinking, what would it be like to do my own translation of Genesis based upon everything that I know? Well, I started doing that, and man, was that an eye opener. I remember telling Susan when I first started doing that, this is what the Lord has told me to do, and this is very much a next logical step in this thing. But the Lord really laid it into my heart that this is going to open you up to something that is going to be really, really monumental. So hang on to your hat, kiddo. We're going into Genesis. Well, then I hit this point during that translation process where, as I was banging back and forth with the AI, it mentioned that there was a name shift in Genesis 1. And I was like, a name shift? What do you mean a name shift? That was the big bang moment for me, where this whole thing of divine name pattern began and has blossomed into a gigantic, you know, it's a mountain of information. And I'll show you here in a second. So let me see. Is so far questions, comments, chime in, push your way in, because I'm a mouth and I yak. Anything? No? Okay. All right. All right. So let's dip our toe into the whole divine name shift, which is my name for it. That's my coinage there. So gonna do a little bit of a roadmap here, and then we're gonna go do some show and tell. So Elohim, Genesis 1:1 through 31, and then chapter 2, 1 through 3, is nothing but Elohim. Every time in your English Bible, you'll see the word God. It is, in the Hebrew, it is the word Elohim. Then it shifts. So we go from creation, so to speak. Um, uh, we'll just use that word as much as I don't like the word very much in this context, but we'll just go with it. So creation from Genesis 1 all the way to Genesis 2, verse 3, nothing but Elohim, and this is all creation until you finally get to Elohim resting. Well, then, starting in the very next verse, you get Yahweh Elohim. So when you see the language in the English, you're going to see Lord God. It's going to switch from God to Lord God, and this is Yahweh Elohim. And so what's happening is Yahweh Elohim is now, and it's I don't want to explain yet exactly um, the context of that, but it's Eden, it's Adam, and then it's Eve, and it's the whole what other people from many, many centuries have said, well, this is a zoom in. Genesis 2, 4 through 25, and chapter 3, verse 1, this is the writer of Genesis zooming in on Genesis 1, 26 and 27. No, he's not. That's not what he's doing. This is the continuation of the story. This is the next step in the story. And the confusing part for most English readers only is that they don't see this name change really going on. They don't understand that the name change is there, and the English doesn't give them a whole lot of clues. So they just think that, well, it's God doing all these things in Genesis 1, and now it's God doing all these things. And well, if God created Adam and Eve in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, well, then that's the wide angle view, and this is the close up. That's not the case. The name shift is the first clue. Well, then we get to Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 through 5, and this is the snake. This is the serpent. And he switches to Elohim. He doesn't use Yahweh Elohim. He switches back to Elohim. The question is why? Then you've got a couple of verses that don't have any Elohim or Yahweh Elohim in them at all. This is where Eve and Adam finally make the fall. And then in Genesis 3, verses 8 through 23, it switches back to Yahweh Elohim. And this is Yahweh Elohim confronting the now fallen Adam and Eve and kicking them out. And then the next thing you know, in Genesis 4 1, you've got Eve getting pregnant and it switches to Yahweh. So that's kind of it, and it's all over the place. Trust me, I have now been through Genesis, Exodus, um, uh, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I've started into Joshua, Judges, and I've just started to crack the case on Ruth. This pattern flows almost perfectly, relentlessly through every single one of those books. And the context, which we're going to get to here really quick, is going to tell the tale. But uh, let's switch over and let's go to Genesis chapter 1 and let's watch it. Now I've highlighted both the words Elohim and Yahweh. And so don't know if you guys can see it well enough on your screens, but every place that has this golden highlight is either Elohim or Yahweh. And you may be able to tell. Tell me if I need to increase the size of this text, if you can read it. If I need to increase the size, I can. Does everybody see it okay? No complaints? All right. I'll assume that everybody can see it all right. Okay, so Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to scroll down here. All of these are Elohim, every single one of them. They're all Elohim, 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 all the way down through the end of chapter 1. There's 27, 30, 31. You see, 31 has, and God saw, and Elohim saw everything that he had made. Behold, it was very good. There was evening and morning, the end of the sixth day phase. Now we're going to switch into day 7. And again, we've got Elohim. Seventh day, Elohim finished the work and rested. In other words, got the inauguration and taking the throne and beginning to rule in the government that he has set up. This is Walton speaking in this case. So Elohim blessed the seventh day, made it holy because on it Elohim rested. In other words, Elohim took the throne. Now, right there, I'm going to suggest to you that that Elohim is not just Yahweh. Because if it was, it would say Yahweh. I'm going to suggest to you that this is Yahweh plus all of this Holy One sons of God who are ruling, who have their own thrones. We know that from things like Revelation, where we see ruling spirits surrounding God on their own thrones, coming off of their thrones, casting their crowns in front of him, so on and so forth. This is very much A&E uh, um, terminology and worldview. Um, Gods never were by themselves doing everything by themselves. They were always operating through some kind of a bureaucratic government apparatus. Rarely did they do things on their own unless they were extraordinarily special, which we're going to get to here in a second. But I'm suggesting that this every instance of Elohim in here is not God. I'm referring to this as God plus. In other words, it's Yahweh plus his holy ones. And you can take that all the way back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God plus restored, not created, rehabilitated the heavens and the earth. That's the very first statement. The earth was without form and void. This is literally useless, and it's talking about sacred space. The earth was not useful as sacred space. So the first thing that he had to do was to fix what was broken. And the spirit, the ruach of Elohim. So even though this is uh yeah, Angela, absolutely. The pronouns here are based on a mental filter, a traditional theology or a theological filter that says this is God, therefore, like you would say of, a person, you would say he or his, you would say him or her, hers, and so on and so forth. They're singular. But this was the amazing thing that came out of it was if Elohim is a group, you can refer to the group in as a whole with a singular verb. So the singular verbs are not telegraphing that this is a single uh, um, uh, person, as in the person of God. This is telegraphing that it is a singular of a group. It would be like saying uh, uh, the team went to practice. And uh, in English, it kind of breaks down because you're going to use pronouns that are plural pronouns. But in Hebrew, it doesn't work that way necessarily, as I discovered. You can use singular pronouns and the gender is going to be male, but remember, we're talking about Elohim. Number one, they're all male. And I may be talking out of my wheelhouse there, and I may have to back up and get more education on that. But it's my understanding so far that um, when you're talking about Elohim, if you're pointing to them as a group of two or more beings, plural beings, you can still talk about them in singular terms as long as you're referring to them as a group. So again, going forward all the way out to 3, then we get to verse 4. These are the generations of the heaven and earth when they were bara, hibara. They were formed. They were rehabilitated. They were organized, to use Walton's view of it. And then it switches. Yahweh Elohim. And for the next, until I think I said verse 25, it's all going to be Yahweh Elohim. Now it's the Yahweh who is the head of the Elohim. He's the head of the government. So kind of the way to look at this is governmental term, governmental context, because we're in Eden. We're kind of in we're in the White House, if you want to use that type of thinking. And the cabinet is there, but the president is going to do some things. He's not just going to sit back behind uh, um, the resolute desk and just dictate, and everybody's going to do everything. He's going to do some things too. Some things he's going to do very personally. Most of the time, he's going to delegate. In this case, this is the head of state who is addressing Eden. And Eden is also populated by the other lesser uh, members of his cabinet, of his administration. Nevertheless, this is Yahweh Elohim who's doing all these things. And so you'll notice it's Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Elohim. Goes on a little excursion here talking about Eden and how it was put together and the rivers and so on and so forth. And then we get Yahweh Elohim taking the man, put him in the garden to work, and Yahweh Elohim, and then we get to Yahweh Elohim and all of the beasts of the field, and the man, the Adam, giving name to all of the livestock and the birds and the beast and so on and so forth. But for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. This is all about procreation. And it's my contention that in this view, what has happened is in the rebellion that precedes Genesis 1:1, all of the animals and kinds and humans and everything have been hybridized and mixed. One of the chores of the Elohim, Yahweh plus all of the Elohim together as they show up to fix things, is bring they have to uncorrupt this stuff. So now that it's uncorrupted, what has happened is that Yahweh Elohim goes out. He either forms Adam from this stock, but he forms him in a way that he is fit for the purpose of bringing him in as the Dauphin Warden, who's the human being in training to be the human king on Earth. And he brings him in, but he has to test him first. He has to demonstrate, Adam in this case has to demonstrate that he's not going to do like what it is that he sees out in the big wild world, the chaotic world that God has rehabilitated and reformed. What Adam has to do is Adam has to name all of these things and not get the things crossed up. Adam passes the test. So, as a point of satisfaction, the Yahweh Elohim causes a deep sleep. That deep sleep, that tardama right there, if you look at that in other portions of scripture, you're going to find that this is a trance-like state that people will go into when they go into some kind of a vision or a theophany. And so that's the tardama that is here. It's not being caused to fall upon uh, um, the man that in terms of Adam himself. It's Ha-Adam, the Ha-Adam of the Genesis 1:26-27. That's the Ha-Adam. It's humanity. Humanity that has been rehabilitated and brought out of the corruption and has been uncorrupted and rehabilitated. Now the Lord goes out and he's now going for this is a I liken this to a Cinderella story where humanity is now the call goes out. Yahweh Elohim goes out, says, I'm going to pick the right woman out of the half. Because if you look, it says one of his ribs, that rib there is not rib, it's side. This is the same word that is used when God shows up to Abraham and splits the animals in half and does the covenant walk down the animals that are split in half. This is the same word that is used for half or side. It's also used for the side of the temple when it describes the side of the temple. So what literally is going on here is Yahweh Elohim is going out to humanity, looking at the female half of humanity and says, let me find the perfect princess for my prince. And he finds her. The glass slipper fits. When that happens and he closes up the place with flesh, in other words, he's saying the selection process is over. All of you other ladies, thank you very much for showing up, but you're disqualified. You don't meet the criteria. This one woman does. She meets it perfectly. She brings him in procession. So the uh, Selah that the Lord, that Yahweh Elohim had taken from Ha'adam, uh, he forms her. Now, I may be wrong about this in the sense of I don't know if she's pre-existing or if he forms her like he forms Adam, where it's a rehabilitation process where there's a like an animal husbandry thing that's going on. All I know is that this is a process that is going through and it gets applied to this Isha, this woman that is going to become Eve, and she comes in royal procession to, in this case, this is the man, this is Adam. And then the man said, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. This is a covenant thing that's going on here. So he goes into waxing eloquent with covenant language, very much the same thing that Israel does with David when they covenant themselves, when they bind themselves by oath to follow David, whatever David tells them to do as king, they bind themselves to him and they use the same type of language, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. So this is covenanting language. Literally, this is Adam and Eve getting married as the father brings. I think this is one of the reasons that in our marriage ceremonies in the West, we have the father giving away the bride to the groom. I think this is the picture of it here. But nevertheless, it is all Yahweh Elohim until we get to um, verse uh, 2 of chapter 3. And then we get the serpent, the snake, saying to the woman, to the Isha, he's saying, did Elohim actually say? Now it's interesting here that he says, did Elohim, the group, did the group starting with Yahweh at the top, he's the chief Elohim, all of the other created ones. And let me see. Oops, sorry. Go into the team chat here and see. Huh. Okay. Um, so, and I should get sorry, I should get the Zoom thing back up here where I can see the chat because I can't see the chat. Where is it at? Chat. Show meeting, slide, annotate, chat. There we are. Woohoo. Oh, Carrie's here. I didn't even notice that Carrie was here. Great, Carrie. Go for it. Are you still here?
Yeah, can you hear me all right with this?
I can.
All right. I don't know how well this microphone works on this computer.
It's working really well.
Okay, great. So could you explain a little bit more about what you're saying about the verbs here? This is actually a really good point for what I wanted to say, what you're saying here in Genesis 3:1. Can you go over again what you're saying about Elohim in combination with the verb?
Yeah, so the idea that I had uh posed in my research was do the singular verbs have to point to a singular person? Are we forced to think that Elohim is a singular person? Whether you think that's the Trinity is one or, what have you. Or could it be that the plural verbs are pointing at a singular group where the group is two or more or many or millions of Elohim, of spirits, which is really, I think, probably the better word. That was the idea that I came away with. And it seems to be fitting not just within Genesis chapter 1, but as we'll see a little bit later on, it seems to fit through like the first 7 to 8 books that I've looked at so far in grave detail. Does that kind
Okay,
of get
but
towards it?
okay, yeah. Have you found any other examples, or have you tried to look for other examples where that might be the case? Um, I know there's few places where you have the plural or the what some people call the plural of majesty with the verbs. But we do have Elohim with plural verbs though.
We
So
do.
the only way we can really tell if it's singular or not is with the verb. That's literally the only way you can tell. So if we take away that as a proof of understanding that we're referring to the singular God versus all of the gods, then we have some hermeneutical problems there, first of all. And I'm not aware of any scholars who would say that you can use a verb in that way. I get your point, like in theory, where you can refer to a group, like a team or whatever,
Hmm.
in uh, using singular language because you're referring to a group.
Hmm.
But again, we have Elohim with plural nouns or verbs, excuse me. So I
Yeah, so that would be that for me, that would be a very interesting study, and it's a piece that I haven't gone to yet. Um, I I I haven't driven that far down into the language. Number one, because the Hebrew is not necessarily within my wheelhouse. So I'm not like, Dr. Heiser or somebody at his level to be able to suss that out.
sure. No,
The
it's a good thing to think about, and I'll have a look around myself, but I've
yeah.
not heard anyone say
So
anything
here
along those things.
Well,
So
here's the thing that was driving me, Carrie. Beyond that, I mean, just moving beyond just the language and the grammar and yes, and Angela, I did check Septuagint, and but I don't know that I went that far with it. So hang on to that thought. The thing that really drove me was that um, am I thinking the way that I'm thinking, and are the people around me thinking the way they're thinking about the verbs because of the traditions they've been taught? Are the traditions in the driver's seat of dealing with the language, or is the uh is can what happens if I strip away the tradition and I try
sure.
to come back to an ancient Near Eastern view, which is what
Yeah,
Walton did for me. Walton took
yeah.
me to the place of saying, put that on a shelf for a second. go back to the A and how would an A&E person understand this worldview? How would they view this? And if they're looking at this as a supreme God with a bureaucracy living with and operating with him, then does the language support that? And I have to say, I haven't gone far enough with that to be able to tell.
Yeah, and we'll
I'm
have to
guessing.
look at cognate languages as well, as
Yes.
far as that study goes. But it's a good question. It's a good point. It's a good thing to think about. But we do have the switch in the verbs in Genesis 1:26.
Yeah.
So we have the let us, and then we have it switching to a singular verb. And so why would we have the let us if there's no distinction? You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, and it's a really good point. Again, it's a level that I was looking at it from the what makes the best sense to the cohesiveness of the story if it's applied all the way through. And one of the things that um, the AI tools kept coming up with in my studies of other people and what they're talking about is that this is it seems like it's largely being driven off of the what is it, the documentary theory, the JEDP. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It- I mean, and just because we're on the topic,
yeah.
the caution I would say is if we can't tell the difference, then how are we going to tell the difference, first of all? Because either some of them are singular, or we can't tell which ones are singular, or it becomes we can't tell at all in any form at all. Would be one caution, and I'm sure you've probably thought of that.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
uh, yeah, so interesting thought at any rate.
Yeah, so again, this is where it is that I started. I started in Genesis 1 and 2 and then 3 because okay, the serpent switches back to Elohim. The other piece of the puzzle for me was is if I go back to where um, Yahweh Elohim is in the garden and he plants the trees. There's the tree of life. There's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In A&E, trees are something that can be seen and viewed as as spirits or gods. They're not necessarily physical trees with leaves and physical fruit and so on and so forth. Again, I think that's a thing that we've been foisting on the text because of material creation. We want these to be trees. And we want Eve to see this really pretty tree, and it's prettier than any of the other trees, and it's got this really fantastic fruit. And oh my goodness, it's such delicious fruit. And God's uh, doing all of this based upon, don't, that's really good fruit, but don't touch that or eat that. I don't think that's what's going on at all. Um, from so looking at the story, it occurred to me, well, what if those are actually spirits? What if these are the holy ones? What if that is the equation in a ancient Near Eastern person's point of view, that he's looking at the Elohim spirits that are within that context, they're in that government, they are on their thrones, they're present within that arena, and what literally the eating is about is not eating physically eating food, kind of like Jesus in John chapter 6, telling them that you have to drink my blood and eat my flesh if you're going to be a part of me. I don't think Jesus was, taking a knife and carving chunks out of his arm to say, hey, here, have a bite. Um, I think that eating and drinking, and this is a thing again in ancient Near Eastern culture, that eating and drinking is a matter of covenant making. And um, it just the story that played out in my head is you've got God telling Adam, you can talk, you can eat, you can talk with, you can align with all of these trees. These are great. These are my guys. They're trustworthy. You can talk with them. But that tree over there, that particular spirit over there, you just stay away from him. Because if you get tangled up with that one, you're going to be in a very bad place. He's going to lead you down a road that is ultimately going to kill you. And it's going to result in some really bad things. Because eating is a covenant act, it seemed rather straightforward from that ancient view that this would be an alignment issue. Eve is being called into an alignment. So suddenly in my mind, the snake um, is no longer the devil. The snake is either a subordinate to the spirit that is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he's saying, "Hey, why don't you go talk to my boss? Man, my boss has got some really good things to say." And he's, did those other Elohim say that, you shouldn't talk to him? Pfft, man, they don't know what they're talking about because trust me, he's gonna steer you right. And so she does that. So the snake is talking about Elohim, 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 and then we switch after the snake is done. She does what she does. She brings Adam into the thing. And where it started for me, actually, even more than that, I forgot to mention this, is this, they knew they were naked. And I was mentioning to Mike, I don't think this is actually naked in the sense of physically naked. And I don't think those fig leaves, if these other things are metaphors, I don't think it's actual physical fig leaves. I think what's happened is that they realize that they're now vulnerable. They've made the wrong choice in terms of allegiance. And in making that wrong choice, um, they realize that suddenly they're out from underneath the protection. They're vulnerable. They're going to get hurt. And so I was talking with Mike, and I was like, it almost seems like this is Adam and Eve trying to save themselves. They're trying to figure out how to get out of the problem. And so they're putting together the fig leaves, and the way it's being, the self-salvation solution is being described as nakedness and fig leaves, vulnerability and self-salvation. I can save myself. Here's how I'm going to do it. Then we step back in verse 8, back to Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Elohim, and it continues with Yahweh Elohim all the way to the end. And Yahweh Elohim has a long speech here that he gives. And then we get back down to, again, Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Elohim. And then in verse 4, we get to uh, Adam knowing Eve, his wife. She conceives, bears Cain, and I've gotten a man with the help of Yahweh. And in the way that this has worked out with the looking at this pattern between Yahweh Elohim and Yahweh Elohim and some of the other surrounding words like Shaddai and um, oh gosh, there's a few others that have come into view as I've gone through this. They're kind of surrounding this core concept is Yahweh is pure covenant, so he's dealing with people at a covenant level. Yahweh Elohim is dealing with covenant issues within a wider governmental um, um, uh, context, and then Elohim alone can be um, either the the Elohim operating in a God plus, which is what I'm referring to it as, or it can be the gods of the pagans. In other words, all the rebels and the bad guys. So leaving that for a second, that's a little bit of show and tell there. And going back to here. We've talked about that. And then this has been out of going through just Genesis through Deuteronomy, finding almost 2,000 instances of either Yahweh alone, Elohim alone, or Yahweh Elohim, or Yahweh Eloah, and various other forms of it, that there's almost 2,000 of them. It's mostly Yahweh alone. It's covenantal. And a little bit of it is Elohim alone, and then the rest of it is Yahweh Elohim in some variant. So you can kind of see how these numbers work out. Again, uh, the creation and pre-Abraham is almost evenly split with Elohim. Not that these numbers necessarily mean anything. Um, uh, it's the detail getting down into the scripture itself that really counts and really matters. Um, and let's see, that's where I ended off. Okay, I didn't get any further than that. So let me go to my notes. So I'm using a thing called Obsidian to keep my notes. And in Obsidian, um, I've gone through, as you can see, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and then I go down through and have been pulling out all the instances. Let me get to one that's a little bit later on. Let's switch to Leviticus. I think this is Leviticus. Yeah, Leviticus. This is the first part of Leviticus. Anyway, um, again, been going down through all of the uh, uh, have been blocking it out, and then within each block, numbers might be a better view of it. Yeah, within each block, going chapter by chapter, pulling them out. This is where it is that, as you're pointing out, Carrie, that it really needs the attention of how does it work with the language? How does it work with the verbs? How does it work in context? I mean, I've done a lot of this work just based upon the context of the words and what's going on within the context, and then trying to keep that in an ancient view that there's this whole government structure that is going on that literally gets set up in Genesis 1, where it's light and dark, and all the good stuff is in the light, all of the bad stuff is in the dark, but Yahweh Elohim is over the whole thing. They're governing it all, both the good and the bad. Um, the bad at that point, while they've been prior to Genesis 1, they've been kind of rebels on a rampage doing whatever it is that they want. When Yahweh shows up with all of his entourage, he puts a stop to that, puts them under control. And so, for example, this is, I think, is the source of uh, Enoch, when you get the 200 sons of God leaving their habitation, the place where God told them to stay. You guys stay and operate within the darkness. They come into a place where they're not supposed to be, and they do what they do. And then God says, okay, you no longer get to be just in the dark. You're actually going to be in the dark, and you're going to be in prison in the dark, which is, I think, where Jude and Peter pick it up and talk about angels that are in Tartarus, that are in the abyss. These are the ones that said, no, we don't want to just stay in the dark and do what you tell us to do. We want to do our own thing. We want to go back to that pre-Genesis uh, chaos, and we want to cause chaos all over again. So, and one of the interesting things was to do this exercise, and I don't know if I scroll down in here and find that's no. I want to find an example here. Mm. Oh, we can do the Leviticus 16. Let me see if I can find Leviticus 16 here real quick. Block 4. Okay. Block 2, 3, and block 4. Because this is where Rillera is going to take us, is largely to Leviticus 16. And this is probably so small that you guys can't read it. I don't know if I can blow that up in size or not. I don't think I can. No. Uh, and huh, maybe I should just go ahead and stop this here because we're already at 11 minutes after 8. Let me just open it up to everybody and let's just kind of bat it around with whatever happens to hit you out of everything that I've presented so far. I've probably done a really poor job of making my case, but um, hopefully we can get some discussion here and see what we end up with. Anybody?
So are you saying that the pattern is, I mean, I know you're kind of saying this, but
Hmm.
how explicit are you saying that the pattern is the exact same throughout? uh, or is it roughly the same, or if that makes sense?
Yeah, it seems to work um uh really, really well. And one of the places is where let me see if I can get this uh do uh Balaam, and what I want is so Balaam is one of the places where it works really well because Balaam is not an Israelite, he's a pagan, but he uses the words in a correct way when he's talking about the when he's talking about the pagan gods, he's referring to them as Elohim, but when he turns around and he's talking about Israel's God, uh, he refers to Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim. And let me see if I can get that's gosh, where is that saying? Numbers 23, 20, 27. Okay. Switch over here. Let's do Genesis. And let's go back to Numbers and 23. And okay. All right. So Balaam answered Balak, did I not tell you all that Yahweh says that I must do? And Balak said to Balaam, come now, I'll take you to another place. Perhaps it will please Elohim that you may curse them for me. So from Balak's point of view, he's a Gentile pagan. He's not talking in terms of Yahweh. He's talking in terms of Elohim. So the question is why does Balaam use Yahweh and Balak uses Elohim? Balaam then says, saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel. So it's Yahweh, it's in the context of Israel, covenant Israel. So it makes sense that Yahweh is used about covenant Israel in terms of blessing. But then when Balaam lifted up his eyes, Israel camping tribe by tribe, the spirit of Elohim, the Ruah Elohim, came upon him and took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, son of Bor, blah, blah, blah. He goes through the whole thing. That the let's see, if we back this, Israel. So the context is Israel. So the spirit of Elohim, and from my point of view, this is God's administrative government, Yahweh's administrative government. This is not the Elohim of the pagans, but it is the Elohim of God's government, and it then puts it in the context of Israel and Jacob and so on and so forth. So it switches back to covenant, which is uh, goes back to Yahweh. Um, we can also see it in the story of Pharaoh. Pharaoh does the same thing. Pharaoh starts out with uh, Elohim, and so does Moses. When he's talking to Pharaoh, he refers to Elohim, but when he switches, um, and he's talking about he's talking directly with Yahweh. He's dealing with Israel. It's Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim. And then, when he speaks to Pharaoh, it starts out with nothing but Elohim, but eventually it works its way to where Pharaoh starts getting the idea that, oh, yeah, okay, it's Yahweh Elohim, and I'm dealing with this. And when he finally gets down to the point that he's really suffering after all of the plagues, Pharaoh even switches and calls him Yahweh, your Elohim. He won't refer to him as Yahweh, my Elohim, which is kind of like he's coming right up to the edge of repenting, but he won't cross the line. He won't say Yahweh, my Elohim, because he's still anchored to his Elohim, his gods. And I just am finding this all the way through that the context really depends upon whether you're talking about personal relationship with Yahweh and covenantal relationship, whether you're talking about
It
leadership
would be
of
Yahweh
Israel.
Elohim.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Never mind, I was thinking. I'm trying to follow along with you here in the text.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so again, it's a matter
Okay.
of no, go ahead.
Uh, sorry. Have you I'm pretty sure there are places where people who are in covenant with God will say something similar to that construct, right? Like the Lord your God, even though they are people who should be. I'm trying to pull up in my mind who this is, and I can't remember. But I think it's one of the patriarchs, in fact, who says the Lord your God, even though he's not saying my God, but that I don't think that's saying necessarily that he's
Well, who's
not
he
in covenant.
talking?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but who is he talking to?
I forget. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
So also I just curious if you're tracking any differences in Elohim versus Ha Elohim.
Uh, that hasn't come on the radar. So I don't know how to answer that. So the answer is
Yeah,
no,
okay.
I'm not.
Something to think about for future digging anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah,
Hi Elohim would be more of like adding an article to it. But hey, um, as a prefix, it's like the in English.
Mhm.
So I guess it'd be like the God
Gods, plural,
or gods.
for Elohim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always targeted, and what it is that I'm finding is that it's always targeted um at whatever the context is that you're pointing at. So even though, and this is kind of to Carrie's point, that even though you're Moses and you are in direct covenant with Yahweh at a very personal level, um, just because you're Moses and you're in direct covenant with Yahweh, if you're talking with Pharaoh, it doesn't mean that you're talking with Pharaoh and you're using that personal covenant name. You're talking to Pharaoh in language that is directed at him within his context. His context is not Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim. His context is Elohim, meaning his own gods, or meaning the overall governmental structure that is set up back in Genesis chapter 1. So in Genesis 1, the governmental structure that is set up is Yahweh is at the top of the food chain. The Elohim are beneath him. One part of that is light, good. The other part is dark, bad. Both of them are in his control and in his command. And this is kind of a foil moment against the pagans, because the pagans always see their gods as um, number one, they're equal. Number two, they're combative. They have to fight for what it is that they get. I think it's who is it, Marduk, that has to destroy Tiamat and so on and so forth. That doesn't happen in Genesis chapter 1. That's one of the points I think that Dr. Walton makes
What?
is he just shows up and starts commanding everybody to do stuff and they just do it. Yeah, Nick.
Well, because I'm just saying is that especially because Walton's been over this when you look at the language is that the tohu wabohu and that
Mhm.
everything's over the tahom, which has the root word tiamat.
Mhm.
That's always that's a direct parallel to the Marduk story,
Exactly.
and Yahweh's just doing the same version of that, just Jewish, just Jews
Well,
doing
except
it.
that he's not having to go into combat. He doesn't combat anything. He shows up and he just starts issuing orders and they obey. It's
Well,
not like they rebel against him and say, "No, we won't go." They
yeah,
do go.
well, the Marduk story has more flair, but essentially the same thing is going on, is that chaos is being ordered to
Yeah.
form
Yeah.
the cosmos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get it that there's it's not that everything within the pagan stories is a lie, right? um there's truth, but then the truth gets twisted and distorted. And I think that's really the idea here is that here we have truth, there we have distortions. But at any rate, um what was the other one that gosh, it was right in my mind that I was gonna point out. Oh, yeah. So Moses, when he first shows up at Sinai, um, and I'm not remembering right off the top of my head where in Exodus it is that Moses shows up at Sinai. He sees Yahweh, the burning bush. He sees Yahweh. When he goes up and he turns aside to go see that, what immediately happens is he's confronted by Elohim. And as I was reading this with this pattern in mind, what it came across as is that this is Sinai. Yahweh's not there by himself. He's there with his entourage on Sinai. So when Moses first steps up, he is met by Elohim who say, "Take off your shoes. This is holy ground." They're essentially preparing him to go into the presence of Yahweh. He can't just, lackadaisically walk into the God's where God is holding court and just step in there and do whatever he wants. They're saying, "Hey, no, there's a protocol. And your protocol here, we're telling you, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground." So he does. And then he's at that point seems to be ushered into Yahweh's presence. And then he deals with Yahweh one to one. But then it starts going back and forth. And as there's a whole discussion that goes on between, as we already know, there's a discussion that goes on between Moses and Yahweh. But every now and again, Moses, he realizes that he's not alone. He's having a discussion with Yahweh, but it's not just Yahweh who's there. And every now and again, he'll back up and he'll the language will be is that he says to Elohim, he's addressing the whole group. Now Yahweh responds back to what it is that Moses says, but it's like Moses is doing this court thing where he's addressing the court at the same time that he's addressing Yahweh, but it's not just, it's not just him and Yahweh and everybody else just goes away. It's a whole court arrangement with these holy ones that are there, and he's dealing with them. And I don't remember where that is, but that was a fairly detailed study going through that and seeing that um, there's this exchange that goes on, and ultimately, um, uh, yeah, that kind of frames it. It would be like you and I walking into the White House and you're going to have a discussion with President Trump, but his whole cabinet is there. And you may look around the room to the cabinet and address the entire cabinet, but it's Donald Trump that then responds back to you and says, "Well, here's what it is that I think." And then you may then address him back directly as Yahweh, but every now and again you break off and you address the entire administration. So that's kind of the read that I'm getting, and it's a pattern that is holding all the way through. I wish the font on my notes over here was bigger to where you guys could read this, because I'm a little concerned that it's so small that you can't read it, which makes it difficult. And I apologize for that. I should have had this in a better format. Again, this, like I say, I was beginning of this whole thing. I was like, man, the whole thing seemed very wooden. But anyway, well, that's basically what I have. We're at 8:26. I wish I could set the table a little less sloppily for you guys. I will say that I have a lot of this as PDFs that has a ton of that detail. I am happy to send you those some of those PDFs. Some of them are short overviews. Others, like one of them here, I forget exactly which one. I think it's this guy right here. Ends up being about 75,000 words. It's a lot of material, but it goes down to the detail that I've done so far. And to Carrie's point, there's a lot more detail to be dug out here, to see how it shapes up. And the language is certainly, again, it's not a thing that is in my wheelhouse, so I'm struggling with it. This is where um, I'd like to take all of this and turn it over to somebody who has the training and say, "Hey, man, what do you think? Look at it, spend some time with it, see where it goes." I don't know. So that's what I have, guys.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks for laying that out. It's interesting.
Yeah, it it seems to hold. I can it is let me know privately if you want to. Happy to. These things are so easy to box up as PDFs and send them to people so that you can read them. Um, Let me know if you'd like me to do that. But anyway, otherwise, if um, does anybody have anything you want to add before we end this off?
Yeah, I put this in the chat, but if we can get to it or not, that's fine. Um, yeah, so like a while ago, I sent you JD Odlin's write-ups where he talks about the notion of Elohim,
Yeah.
and he using consonantal Hebrew alone, comparing it with like Syriacs, he says that Elohim is like a masculine and feminine together using context of Yahweh.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. And I didn't know what to make of that. I mean, I don't know. That's a Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, somewhere I mean, God creates us male and female for a reason. That isn't just some kind of cosmic accident, right?
No.
Is part of the argument for that that the grammar is going to match on to gender?
I don't know, Nick, you're more familiar with Audlin than I am.
Uh, Man, you had a whole week. I'm sorry, could you please repeat your question, Carrie?
Is the argument that the grammatical gender is going to map onto ontological gender?
Well, because Audlin's big point is that, man is made in the likeness of God. God has masculine and feminine, therefore he's in the camp of that Adam was an androgyne. And
Gotcha.
yeah, and so that's where, and so with, and with consonantal Hebrew, he says it's like, well, Elohim is Eloah, which is the or Elohe or Eloha, which is the feminine, or he takes the feminine form of Elo, that mixed with the masculine ending him. So it's both male and female together making androgyne Adam. And then God takes the baculum out of Adam, and that's what he forms Eve with.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story that I briefly saw from uh I forget whether it was the Talmud or just where it was, where there was a rabbinical view that essentially um, Adam and Eve were once the same entity, and then God split them apart, kind of like uh, what's the drama thing where you've got, you know, the two, is that Jan, where it's two entities, one coming out of the other, but they're back to back.
Yeah, yeah, he brings that up too, because there is an idea that is an interpretation of that, but it's the rabbi's trying.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, because he's saying that's one way to kind of understand how that relationship works, but it's that like Adam's an androgyne, but then separated into male female.
Yeah.
So if you a lot of this plays into like the theological concept of cosmic duality of the masculine and feminine together, which is extremely old. It's like basic theology, and especially worked in the ancient world because, again, with the order god and the chaos goddess doing something to create the cosmos, is that that's where you see both of those universal forces
Yeah.
um like functioning.
Well, that was the thing that I really, so when I back the thing up and I go back to what I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation about there being a primordial history, whether it's 1,000 years or a billion or 13.8 or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Um, we've got this stuff that we've dug out of the ground, right? We've got Neanderthals and Denisovans and Homo erectus and blah blah blah. We've got all these strange, weird hominid things that we pull out of the ground, and we even have the genetic tie between Neanderthals and, at a minimum, um, uh, Nordic, Slavic, European, so on and so forth, where we have traces of Neanderthal DNA in us. And it just made all the sense in the world to me that if you've got a primordial situation where God has started creation, ex nihilo, it's running along, humming along, and whether it's evolving, whether that evolution is like the old clockmaker thing, right? Where the deists are, God builds the clock, winds it, sets it to running and then walks away from it, or whether it is that God is working with it as it's being created, and it's coming along. Regardless of that train of thought, you end up with rebel hybridizing, mixing creatures that show up and start messing with that DNA. So now you end up with a bunch of hominids that are essentially the result of that chaos, and now God has to cull out and reform the herd and rehabilitate the corrupted herd, chooses um, one of the hominid races and says, okay, you're the best candidate for rehabilitation. Let's start getting humanity back to where I wanted it to be. That this is a project that is going on. You know, Heiser used to like to say that in what it is that he's written, that it was like God ordering pizza for the group. You know, hey, everybody want pizza? Yeah, we all want pizza. Okay, I'll make the pizza or I'll order it and blah blah blah. So God's operating alone. And where I'm looking at it now, it's like, no, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing a corporate rehabilitation process that's going on. So you've got, again, these corrupted hominids, and the group under Yahweh's direction culls out a select group and then starts rehabilitating them, ends up with a rehabilitated humanity, and then either does the same thing to get Adam and Eve, or pulls Adam and Eve from the existing refreshed stock, typically just picking the best of the group, right? The best ram and the best ewe, and pulls them into Eden to start the royal race that's then going to go back out and take the rest of wild woolly chaos, and together with heavenly Elohim is going to be earthly embodied Elohim and bring order to chaos and ultimately kick chaos completely out. That was kind of the version of it that laid itself out to me through all of this.
So
But
Jews are the master race.
no, Jews aren't the master race.
That
Human
sounds like Jews
beings,
are the master race.
yeah, human beings are the master race out of all of the tainted hominids. We're the ones that God recreates because they get corrupted.
So
And
which
so
one's more corrupted than others?
that got wiped out in the flood. It's gone, except for anything that might have happened afterwards. But again, I'm not supporting, and don't take me down the Nazi trail, okay? Or the replacement trail or some of those things, because that's not where I'm going. All I'm headed towards is that Elohim in Genesis 1, 1 and 2 steps into a mess. And when they step into a mess, they roll up their sleeves and say, okay, we're going to get this reorganized. We're going to rehabilitate this thing. We're going to get it back on track. And they get as far as getting Adam and Eve into Eden. And then it just gets messed up again because of Adam and Eve's choices. And now and that was the other thing that I need to point out about this. The interesting thing is there are direct parallels between Genesis and Revelation. Revelation 20, 21, and 22 is a rinse and repeat of the Genesis cycle, except that Genesis ends up in disaster, or in not in disaster, it ends up in setback. And then we spend the rest of the Bible trying to pull it all back together. Jesus comes along, he succeeds where Adam doesn't. And he ultimately finds the complete success of the Genesis project in Revelation 20, 21, and 22. And ultimately, because that project is successfully completed, now all of the rebels, all of those that are not allegiant and faithful to the order of God, they can be done away with. Project over. Now we can get on with the rest of eternity, whatever that amounts to. That was the other thing that I saw in the mix, was this Genesis to Revelation pattern that keeps, or that matches really, really well. And it works if you have a material corruption. Spiritual corruption, from where I'm sitting, is mixture. The conclusion that I have drawn so far, and I'm always open to new data, but the conclusion I've drawn so far is that all of sin is mixture. It's chaos. It's taking God's order and breaking it down. So the light is trying to build the order back. It's trying to rehabilitate it. It's trying to rescue. It's trying to pull people out of darkness into light, cause them to love organization rather than destruction and chaos.
So was Nehemiah correct to ban interracial marriage?
Was he correct to abandon interracial marriage? Why would Nehemiah do that?
Great question.
I don't really, man, that just seems odd. I mean, doesn't that kind of border on the same thing that we did in the South, and same thing we did in
Or actually,
Nazi
I'm
Germany?
sorry. I misspoke. It's actually Ezra who bans interracial marriage for Jews.
Oh, I see.
And then Nehemiah says non-Jews cannot enter the temple.
Got it. I don't
So
know.
coming back to Jewish supremacy theory, because they're the untainted, you know.
Yeah, I don't. Uh, you see, that's kind of the interesting thing too, is, and I'll have to look this up again. I've got this all in my notes. It's all in detail. And I'm just having a hard time because I've been swimming in so much detail. I mean, it's like an ocean of detail, so it's hard to pull it back up at the just a drop of the hat. Is the other thing that happens with Abraham, and this kind of answers your point. Abraham, um, the whole thing uh, with Abraham and Isaac is the obedience that he has to Isaac. If you look at the uses of Yahweh Elohim within the context of the Abraham story, what you see is that this is where it is that Abraham moves from just being in covenant relationship with Yahweh into being installed within the government, the human side of the government apparatus of Yahweh Elohim. He switches, and this, I think, matches what it is that the New Testament teaches when it says, hey, not many of you guys need to be teachers because we're going to have the greater condemnation. Not only do we have covenant relationship with Jesus, but we also have relationship with the government of God, and we carry a great deal of responsibility within that governmental role. So your average believer, the idea is kind of shining out of this, that your average believer, your average Israelite operates with covenant relationship, has a deep respect. If they're going to stay straight with the Lord, they're going to have a deep respect not only for Yahweh as their covenant uh, um, uh, God, but they're also going to have a deep respect for his government. And this is where they get into trouble. They violate that government side. So they bring in the other gods into God's covenant, into his, not only his covenant territory, but his ruling territory, the physical land itself. And that was one of the other parts of it, was Um, interestingly enough, there are law in Leviticus that I never knew about because I didn't really pay attention to it. There's law in Leviticus that says, what do we do when Israel goes off the rails and they disobey? There's law there that says, okay, this is how we handle exile. You're going to get exiled. You're going to go away. You're going to, you know, get beaten up a little bit. And when you get tired of that and you come to your senses, then I'm going to bring you back. And it's never about your destruction. It's never about punishment. I'm not punishing you. What I'm doing is I'm, I'm dealing with sacred space. And if you're not going to live in sacred space in a clean way, I'm going to take you out of sacred space until you get recommitted to the cleanliness and the order of sacred space. And then I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to cleanse you. And then in cleansing you, I'm going to allow you to operate within sacred space. And oh, by the way, even the land has to rest. It has to live under the rule of Yahweh. And if you're going to violate that, I'm going to get you out of the land because the land is suffering because of your uncleanness. So I got to get you straight so I can bring you back. And then when I bring you back and you're repentant and you really do want to operate and cooperate with me in sacred space, whether that be the land, the temple, or you yourself, um, uh, we can do that. But it's always about restoring. It's always about restoration. It's always about um, rehabilitation rather than retribution, which is kind of the other lesson that I'm gleaning from this about this, how this pattern works. And it works out. Judges is a beautiful example of it so far. Every single, you got all these judges, and it's always the same pattern. They disobey, God judges them, God exiles them, they cry about it, they finally get their wits back together and go, oh, gee, this was really stupid. We're in pain. God says, okay, you're there. You've been there long enough. He brings them back. He cleanses them. He then sets them back up and puts them back into sacred space and says, okay, we're going to start the cycle all over again. But they violate it over and over and over again. Again, it's sacred space and how you deal. The name pattern here is tracking with how you're dealing with whether you're in the light, in the dark, you're dealing with people on one side or the other, you're dealing with Yahweh himself, or you're dealing with his government, and how you deal with it, how you violate it, how you support it, so on and so forth. So anyway. Uh, anything else? Again, I've got all these documents. Let me know. I can send them to you. You'll be able to read them yourself and call out the details. And man, if something just doesn't work, if it doesn't come together, please let me know.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, if nobody has anything else, then one of you guys want to pray us out? Did I put everybody to sleep?
I'm here.
Yeah. All
I don't-
right. Well, I guess I can pray us out. I can do that. Father, thank you so much for giving and allowing the opportunity to share this with these really wonderful folks. Thank you for all of their God, for their interaction, for their pushing back, God, because it's the iron sharpens iron. Thank you, Father, for that. I really appreciate it, and look forward to more as we go along. Should anybody be willing to do that, and Father, that you will just help us all to live in loving allegiance to who you are, what your plan is, um, in obedience to all the things that it is that makes us to be like you. God, empower us by your spirit, by your power, your indwelling um, spirit and goodness that guides and directs and leads. Father, thank you for all of these things. Jesus, we are so glad that you are King of Kings and that no matter what, um, Lord, that you love us and that you take care of us. You hold us in your hands and in your arms, leading us, guiding us, helping us, directing us. Father, strengthen us as we go. Lord, that we will be cognizant and aware of and always working with you to keep this sacred space uh, clean and where it is that we are fit for the master's use, that you can use us to a greater and greater degree to bring people to the light. God, at the end of the day, that's what this is also about, is rescuing as many of our brothers and sisters out of darkness into light so that they can join us and not be destroyed, but they can have life and that eternally with you. Father, thank you for all these things. And God, we are so very careful to give you the glory because you're the only one who deserves it. You're the only one who is worthy of it. So thank you for all these things. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share and stop the